This is just going to be 11 vocabulary words that every home buyer needs to know. I'd assume that once you buy a home, this information kind of goes in one ear and out the other, and you need a refresh. So this will be super helpful. So can you explain to me what a buyer's agent is and what their job is?
So how I explain to my clients when they choose me to represent through the purchase is my job is to protect them through the purchase from beginning to end. The buyer's agent does not care what house you buy. So if you're buying a house, I don't care at all what house you buy. I just want to make sure you're protected, you get the best deal possible, and you actually get the house that you want if it's a competitive environment.
The listing agent, what's their job? What do they do?
Yeah, so the listing agent's job is the opposite. The listing agent's job, Carly, if you were selling your house, you would call me and say, hey Christian, we want to sell the house. My job would be to represent you in the sale of your home, protecting you, the seller, and selling that thing for as much money as possible. The big misconception here is that if you go directly to the listing agent, for example, you might get a better deal. A lot of buyers think that. A lot of very seasoned buyers think that. And what they do not realize is when they go to the listing agent directly, they are going unrepresented. And they might not realize that listing agent's job is to sell that house for as much money as possible.
Right.
From experience, when I'm the listing agent and a buyer comes in unrepresented, I would say maybe 8 out of 10 times they disqualify themselves by the information that they share with me directly that a buyer's agent would never share.
Right. I was just going to ask, how often does this first-time home buyer in general talk directly to the listing agent if they have the buyer's agent?
It depends. It shouldn't happen, right? If you trust your buyer's agent and you know what's going on in the process, the buyer should never speak to the seller or the listing agent unless you're maybe at the property or if you're in escrow, maybe at inspections and stuff like that. The idea of your agent is the same thing as if you were in a lawsuit, you'd have an attorney representing you, as the seller or the prosecutor would have an attorney representing them.
Can you define a fixed rate mortgage?
Fixed rate mortgage is just like it sounds. So the rate is fixed through the duration of the term. The gold standard loan that everybody gets is a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So that's 30 years is the term and the rate is fixed throughout.
And what about an adjustable rate mortgage?
Is usually still that 30-year mortgage, but that rate is adjustable. So these are known as ARMs. So the ARM adjustable rate mortgage, if you saw it on paper, it would look like a 7-1. So for example, what that means is the first 7 years of the loan it's fixed, and then the -1 is every year that rate will change. So over the course of the 30 years, if the interest rates are higher, your rate will increase, your payment will increase. If rates go down, your rate will then decrease and your payment will actually decrease as well too. So there's a pro and con there.
But we're gonna go over some of the closing costs. I think that closing costs are what I see on the internet, as I don't work directly with clients, is that people are always shocked that there's all these closing costs. Some of these costs include appraisal fees.
Appraisal is probably one of the biggest scams in all of real estate, but an appraisal is a neutral third party's opinion of the value of the home. The reason I say it's probably the biggest scam is I would probably say 90% of all of the appraisals come in directly at the selling or contract price, and that isn't by chance. But the idea is the appraisal is to protect the lender from you way overpaying on a property. So if you and a seller agree to $1 million on the house and the appraiser goes in and says, this is only worth $900,000, the bank's only going to do your loan based off a $900,000 value.
All right, next one's mortgage fees.
Mortgage fees can be all over the place. That's really broad, but you can have origination fees, you can have credit report fees, you can have all these other things. The reality is all of these companies are business. Obviously, the mortgage company's in business to make money, and usually your higher fee banks are gonna have lower rates, or your no fee banks might have higher rates. So it really just depends on who you're working with, but those are some of the fees.
This says legal fees.
Yeah, so there's going to be, the bank's going to have attorneys, the title company's going to have attorneys, so there might be line items. In closing costs, you're going to get a settlement statement or a CD, closing disclosure, that's this long, and it's line items of all of the nonsense fees that are associated with the purchase.
Next would be an escrow fee.
Escrow fees included in that. So what the escrow is kind of like the accountant of the transaction. It also handles, so they handle all the paperwork and all the money. They make sure that everything's done correctly. all the money is added up at the end, and all the money is dispersed after the property closes. So escrow is the neutral mediary in the middle of the transaction that handles all the paperwork and the money. And these are fees where you're going to DocuSign stuff and get emails, and your escrow fees and your title fees will feel like you're just lighting money on fire. 99% of the work is done behind the scenes.
Home inspections.
Home inspections are mandatory. It is something that you can buy a house, so you can go in blind. You're buying, again, a $500,000 to $1 million or more asset. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into. We've done home inspections on houses that look pretty, and you go in and you realize maybe there's $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in things that you're going to need to immediately do to the house. And if you didn't do that home inspection, maybe you save $1,000 on the inspection and you buy something you otherwise never would have bought.
Next is HOA fees.
It's good and bad. HOA is basically going to take care of the community. So all of the homes in the community are paying into the association, and that takes care of the community itself. If you're looking at a single family home and it's in an HOA, I usually use the joke of your HOA is like insurance to keep your neighbor's boat out of their yard. If you've ever driven through a neighborhood where there's just like stuff in the front yards, if you were in an HOA community, your neighbors could complain to the HOA and they would like not allow that.
Next thing is title insurance.
So title insurance is extremely important and very rarely understood. But what it does is it's basically an insurance policy that says that you are buying this home and you own it. There will be no issues with title, at least for the first year. The reality is your lender is going to make sure that you have title insurance so that they don't get screwed. Where if Carly, if you bought a house tomorrow, the neighbor can't walk across the street and say, hey, you know what, John owed me money, I'm going to put a lien on your house.
Right.
Or I was supposed to be on title, I didn't get any money. Title insurance protects you from things like that.
And then property tax.
Property taxes are by the state. So California has a base 1% property tax. So if you're buying a $500,000 house, you're gonna have $5,000 in property taxes from the state. And then if you're in an area that has like Melrose, for example, a lot of newer built communities, I live in Ladera Ranch that has Melrose, those are additional bills that are on your property tax bill, but they're not necessarily property tax. Kind of confusing, but it's basically a tax for owning dirt. Melrose is a bond that's taken out by the builder to pay for infrastructure. So what that means is when they built Ladera Ranch, let's just use that example, it was dirt and they had to build roads, they had to build sewer, they had to do all the utilities, they had to build the schools and all of this stuff. And obviously that stuff costs money. So the developer has two options. They can do a Melrose bond, which is paid back over usually 30 years by the homeowners, or they can sell everything for more money. So Melrose is usually a vehicle that allows the builders to sell the homes for less money, and you'll have a little bit higher monthly fee or annual fee to pay the Melrose, as opposed to just selling the houses for more money.
And then last is homeowners insurance.
Homeowners insurance is usually required by the lender as well too. If your house were to flood or something like that, you're gonna have an insurance policy on your home that you pay every single year. And then if something catastrophic happens to your house, you have an insurance policy. If you had let's say a water leak and your floors in your kitchen were totally ruined, that insurance policy might cover the complete cost of a remodel.
6 would be contingencies. Can you define that? Explain a couple examples.
Yeah, so your contingencies are buyer protections. There's 3 major ones. You have your inspections. I always encompass this as homework. So you have part of it is inspections, part of it's reading disclosures from the seller. Basically, you're doing all your homework and figuring out if you're comfortable buying the home. So all of the due diligence is done in escrow. 2 is appraisal. Your appraisal contingency is going to be, hey, we're buying this house for $500,000 and we're good to move forward. Now, if the appraisal comes in at $400,000, you're going to probably feel like you're overpaying by $100,000, and the lender's only going to use the value of that now $400,000. If that were the case, we could either renegotiate or back out, and you would not lose your deposit. Same thing with a loan contingency. So you're saying, hey, I'm pre-approved for a loan. I would love to buy your house. I have a pre-approval and I'm ready to go. And all of a sudden, maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, the lender says, you know what, Carly, I didn't realize you had a bankruptcy last week. You should have told me that. We're not going to approve you for the loan. These contingencies are buyer protections so that you can make an offer comfortably and do your due diligence in escrow before you're locked into a deal.
And then the next is earnest money.
So your earnest money deposit is basically saying, Carly, if we wanted to write an offer on a house that we looked at yesterday, one of the first things, so in our offer, we would say, hey, we're willing to buy this house. We'll offer $500,000. I'll give you your earnest money deposit, which is, let's say we wrote this offer today and it got accepted tomorrow. You would put 3% of the purchase price, which is normally the earnest money deposit, into escrow right away. So like on day one. And then the rest of the money at closing. So it's a good faith offer. Like if you wrote me an offer on my house, Carly, and you said I'll give you $1 earnest money deposit, I probably wouldn't think you were very serious.
Right.
But if you're gonna give me that 3%, which is normal, I would feel more confident that you are a serious buyer. As long as you have your contingencies in place and you back out because of something that you have a contingency on, inspection for example, if you put in your 3% deposit, which would be $15,000 on a $500,000 purchase, and we found that the house was gonna split in half tomorrow and break, we would probably wanna back out of the deal. So if you had your contingency for inspections in place, you can back out for pretty much any reason, and you would get your deposit back. Now, the only thing you would lose is the money you spent on inspections, and if you had already done your appraisal, you would lose the money for that too.
When you're walking through an inspection, what are some like really big red flags? Some things that you should like, or some other things that's like, okay, it's a house, it's 20 years old.
The big red flags on inspections are the things you can't really change. You can fix almost anything with money, so there's not very many things that fall into this category. But for your typical home buyer, things that are huge red flags are structural issues, foundation issues, which sound the same, but they're not necessarily. Let's say you're buying a house that has a view. A view usually means there's a slope. And if your foundation is sagging, a 1 or 2 inch sag on the foundation could be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in repairs. So things like that are huge red flags. Water damage is always a big red flag. It's easy to fix with money, but the dollar amount is usually unknown. So if you see a black spot, like we have had one up here, the roof was leaking right above us, and we saw black, and until we lifted up the roof to be able to figure out what's going on underneath, we had no idea if it was a little problem or if it was a huge problem. So water damage obviously leads to mold. Foundation issues are huge red flags. Maybe neighborhood or HOA concerns, which you wouldn't necessarily find out in the home inspection,
Right.
but you could read HOA, and we had a client that wrote an offer on a place, and we looked through the HOA documents, and all the roofs were shot in the entire community, and they didn't have the money set aside in the HOA to fix it. So their proposal to alleviate that issue was to tell every homeowner that they need to write a $40,000 check so that they could replace the roofs. Those are the major red flags. The things that are like normal, like you said, a 20-year-old house, almost every house that we walk into, the inspection will be like, well, your AC works, but it's 20 years old and it should have blew up 5 years ago. It's probably gonna keep working for a while longer, but it could blow up any day. So there's a lot of stuff like that. You're gonna have termites in every single house. It again just depends on what is it gonna cost to fix it. Does it need to be tented? Is it just a little bit of woodwork? So things like that aren't a big deal. The question is who's gonna pay for it and what is the actual cost?
And can you negotiate that with the seller? Like, hey, there's a...
So we talked about contingencies. So these are usually timelines. So when we talked, you said we talked about escrow. We talked about what escrow does. What we didn't talk about is escrow is also like a timeline of, hey, I'm writing an offer today, we'll close in 30 days. So usually for inspections, you'll have 1 to 2 weeks of homework. And at the end of your homework, you should know everything about the house. And then at the end of that, you have the opportunity to do what's called a request for repairs. So if you went through the house and you're like, yeah, everything's pretty good except for the AC's not working, you could write up a request that says, hey, I'd love to move forward in buying this home, but I want you to fix the AC. Or I know it's gonna cost $3,000, so why don't you just give me a $3,000 credit towards my closing cost, and then I'll deal with it later. Yeah, so you can go to our website, you can go to social media. On our website, we post blogs almost every single day on really good home buyers information. If you're not on our newsletter, go to ocmarketupdates.com. Make sure you register for that. We send out every single Friday what we feel is like the most important information right now.